Good afternoon and a warm welcome to this policy dialogue organized by the European Policy Center in cooperation with Think for Europe Network, which gathers 6 prominent think tanks from the Balkan countries. The focus of today's event is on young people from the Balkans and their views on digital issues. This policy area is among the highest priorities both for the European Union and the Balkan region. Yet discussions about decisions in this field mostly happen between expert and industry voices. This means that young people who have grown up under the influence of technology and are some of its frequent users tend to be left out of the conversation, even if they would have loads to contribute on the basis of their actual experiences and preferences. To illustrate how this omission can be problematic, a recent project called Make Future Together set out to test the extent to which debate about the benefits and costs of the internet and social media resonate with young people in the Balkans. And it tried to collect the participants' ideas and preferences about how the digital policy field should develop in the future. The results of this exercise, which we will discuss today, are quite telling of the importance of including the youth in discussions on this topic and about the importance of the EU engaging with the Balkans in this policy field. Our intention is to use this one project as a conversation starter for our exchange today. Exchange which will take place among a distinguished panel of speakers, including Stephanie Borg-Saila, Director for Digital Policy and Editor at GIP Digital Watch Observatory, Alberto Rabakin, Program Officer on Media Convergence and Social Media at the DG Connect European Commission, Nikola Popovic, Member of the International Board at the European Youth Parliament, and Paul Butcher, Policy Analyst at the European Policy Center. Thank you all very much for accepting our invitation. As always, we will first hear from our speakers, and then I will open the floor for questions and comments from you in the audience. And you can pose your questions or comments either in writing or by clicking on the raise hand button. Before we proceed though, I want to give the opportunity to Lola Paunovic, a junior researcher at the European Policy Center Belgrade, to make a few opening remarks about this project that I've just mentioned, which her organization coordinated, and which we want to use today as a basis for discussion. Lola, you have the floor.
Thank you, Corina, and hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the word. I would firstly like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to present the project European Policy Center CEP from Belgrade has been working on alongside its partners from the Think for Europe Network, International Affairs Institute from Rome, Bronislaw Geremek Foundation from Warsaw, and the European Policy Center EPC. This initiative was able to be taken forward with the support of the Education, Audiovisual, and Culture Executive Agency through the Europe for Citizens program. As a part of the Make Future Together EU and the Western Balkans from the Youth Perspective project, we have demonstrated how the region can actually come together and make a constructive input in resolving several issues. Our network of think tanks has been a pioneer example of effective regional cooperation among the region's civil society organizations. We focus on the youth because we recognize that there is a window of opportunity to have the issue of not only enlargement and the topics such as the environment, internet freedoms, and democracy and the rule of law discussed, which are all topics relevant to the Conference of the Future of Europe, but also pushed and to encourage the youth to take an active part in consultations that might influence policy and decision-making at national and even EU levels, thanks to the activities of the project. We engaged in structured citizens consultations. What this means is that we invited youth from all around the country, making sure that we get a representative sample of all ethnicities, genders, and regions to discuss the issue of internet freedoms, its positives, negatives, and who should be responsible for regulating the internet space. All partners on the project engaged in the same process, meaning that we all followed the same methodology or script, if you will. Results and findings were thoroughly reported, which allowed for a cross-regional comparison of findings, which I'm sure Paul will talk about later. We're very proud to say that we have followed up on these consultations with a cross-regional event that was held yesterday, where our youth representatives from each Western Balkan country discuss demands that could potentially be drafted in a manifesto, calling all stakeholders to action. By testing the interests of the Western Balkan youth, we have also seen that they would support the creation of such a document, as we have collected around 400 signatures in less than 2 weeks in favor of such an initiative. This just shows that the consultations with the young people were worthwhile and that their outcome can be and will be taken forward. We're still working on taking those extra steps and hope that a concrete publication summarizing the young people's demands in all these events will be published soon. We also have the privilege to have one of the youth representatives with us today, as Corina mentioned, who will share her experiences and her main takeaway from this process. So you can see that this project was not just a dead letter, but has an actual added value to engaging with the youth and calling for action from relevant stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola. Yes, indeed. We told you that young people from the Balkans were involved in this initiative. And I have the pleasure of welcoming one of the participants in this event here today. Her name is Tasnim Nasufovic. She comes from Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and she has kindly agreed to share with us today from her experience of joining the consultation that was organized in her country. Tasnim, have you enjoyed participating in this project?
First of all, thank you and warm greetings to you all. And as you mentioned, I was able to participate yesterday in the Make Future Together discussion with the rest of the youth from the Balkans. And it was a pleasure to be there. And I must express my gratefulness for being part of a discussion where we each were able to express our views and ideas about certain issues. And I was able to receive many new perspectives, and it also sparked my interest to further uncover more about this issue. Some of the key things that we have mentioned that we emphasized upon was education, and this is something that we all agreed is the crucial place to start from, and where all actors can contribute to and work together to follow this and make this a top priority. And doing this as a result will be will lead to a safer and empowering digital space. And also, I would like to thank you all once again and look forward to listening to this discussion that will present the voice of the youth and also be valuable to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tasnim. We really appreciate that you agreed to share with us today from your experience. Against this background, I would now like to turn to our panelists in order to delve a little bit deeper into the subject and its implications. Paul, I turn first to you. What has this project produced in terms of content, and why should we care?
Thanks very much, Corina. And of course, special thanks to Tasnim and to all of her colleagues and fellow students throughout the region who contributed to this project, because of course they are at the core of everything that we're going to be talking about today. Maybe I should start off by saying a couple of words about EPC's role in this project. We weren't hosting the events in the countries ourselves directly. That was done by the think tank partners that Lola mentioned. But we did have a little bit of input into the methodology design, and we convened the pan-regional workshop that took place yesterday. So although we didn't sit in on all of the events, we did receive the reports from each of the partners, and we've had the chance to hear from some of the young people directly. And so what I'm going to do today is to give a very brief overview of a few of the content-related topics that were discussed at the events. I won't go into detail about the manifesto and demands and so on that might emerge from the end of this process, because that's still being shaped. But I will draw your attention to the fact that the EPC published a paper just yesterday, which is building on the results of these discussions, and also gives some details about content and ties them into the context of the policy debate, particularly in the EU. And I think that is quite important to consider where the young people from the Balkans have talked about issues that are also resonant to things that are being discussed in the policy debate in Brussels. And I'll try to make that connection wherever possible. So I'll also then talk a little bit about why this project is interesting and why it deserves some attention in the context of citizens' participation and the Conference on the Future of Europe, which has really served to emphasize the importance of such exercises just now. Now, I think if there's one thing that really emerged from the discussions, it's probably that for young people, maybe especially in the Balkans, the internet is essentially a fundamental right and is becoming more and more important, particularly in the context of COVID, pandemic, people working from home, studying from home. This means that all education has gone online. And that means that having secure, free access to a reliable, strong internet connection is now essential for everybody in work or education. A couple of our participants mentioned that people in the region who don't have good connectivity, and there are still rural areas, for example, that struggle with accessing reliable internet connections. People in education who don't get access to reliable internet connections can end up dropping out. And this basically means that having a good internet connection at a young age is pretty much essential for setting up your opportunities for the future. We spoke a little bit about business and industry issues, but of course the main focus was really on how the internet and social media impacts the lives of young people. So we weren't really talking about competition and markets that much. It came up a little bit, but for the most part, it was subjects like data privacy, keeping people informed about how their data is used. Young people mentioned that the important things for them are about consent, about information, about awareness. And so all of this ties into education as well. It's boosting media literacy and education and awareness about how the internet works, what opportunities it offers, but also what the potential threats are, is super important. They mentioned quite a lot that the way that social media works, and in some degree the business practices of social media platforms, can have quite an impact on young people's mental health. And I think the mental health aspect is a very important part of these discussions that maybe isn't discussed in policy terms quite as often as it could be. There's a general feeling among most of the participants that social media platforms need to be pressured, perhaps through regulation if necessary, to take action to reduce those things that are encouraging young people to get addicted to social media, to spend too much time online, being exposed to content that promotes unhealthy attitudes, for example, unrealistic beauty standards, bullying, abuse, all of this kind of thing. With the internet, it's basically 24 hours a day and 7 days a week that people can be exposed to this kind of content. It doesn't only take place in school playgrounds or on campus anymore. They also mentioned that the internet is great for promoting advocacy, promoting social political causes. It also has a positive impact on mental health. It provides support networks for people. So in all of the discussions, the young people were encouraged to think about both the positive and the negative aspects of the internet, of social media, of digital technology, and to try and find a few ideas for solutions that would preserve the positive things while also diminishing the negative things, and finding that balance. I think overall, one thing that came out quite clearly is that they feel that each individual internet user has a certain amount of responsibility, but also there are so many other actors that can play a role here, including government, including the EU, including the social media platforms themselves. I think there was a lot of agreement among the young participants about what the best things are and what the good things are and what the bad things are. But on the question of who should do what in response, there was a bit more diversity of views, which of course reflects the fact that it's quite a complicated subject. In general, I think they came to a conclusion which is perhaps not so dissimilar from that of the European Commission. And maybe Mr. Rabakin might mention a little bit more about this later. Basically, everyone has a role to play. And the best way to find a common approach is some kind of co-regulatory approach. So something where regulations are developed in cooperation between the government or the EU level and the private sector. So the laws can set out general principles. Social media platforms have a certain amount of freedom in how they adapt their business models to adapt to those new principles and new landscape in response. Now, as for the general importance of this exercise, of course, we don't have a directly comparable exercise going on in the EU member states, so we can't necessarily say just how closely Balkan young people's concerns mirror those of their EU counterparts, though maybe we can make some stabs in that direction. But what we can say is that they spontaneously landed on pretty much all of the biggest topics in the policy debate. So disinformation, cybersecurity, data privacy, connectivity, infrastructure, benefits for businesses and small medium enterprises, media literacy, education, all of these things came up spontaneously. We didn't prompt the young people in any way. They weren't asked to do prior research or to read any preliminary material. This was really just them thinking off the top of their heads about what is important to them. So that suggests that, first of all, they're very well informed. The topic clearly resonated with them. They have a good idea of what the issues are and where policymakers might be able to make a difference. And it also shows that consulting young people on policy issues is completely feasible. It's a very useful exercise. Okay, maybe we didn't answer all of the questions or come up with the perfect regulatory framework, but I think we did demonstrate a few things about how easy it is to do this exercise, including doing it online. So the fact that we're still coping with the pandemic doesn't mean that we have to forget about doing any kind of citizens participation exercise until it's over. And that's good news for the conference on the future of Europe, because that's going to be kicking off, or is kicking off just now. I suppose the proper launch date is on the 9th of May, so coming up in a few days. And this demonstrates that the Balkans can play a part in that as well. We don't need to exclude the Balkans for any practical reasons. We know that they can do it. So if there is any reason for excluding the Balkans, it would only be a political one. And EPC has said several times in the past in papers that Corina has written and co-written with CEP Belgrade, that including the Balkans would be a very important thing for demonstrating that the Conference on the Future of Europe really is about the future of Europe, and so it includes future member states as well. And just as it's important that we engage young people in these discussions, because young people are the future of all of our societies, we think it's important that the future member states also get a say in the policy discussions that will form part of the debate on the future of Europe. There's a lot more that we could cover about this project, but I think I've probably said enough to at least set the ground, and I'm looking forward to hearing everything that the other panelists have to contribute, and of course any questions and comments from the audience at the end of the session as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I found it very interesting and useful. Thank you for highlighting how we can all and also how EU policymakers can learn from these deliberations. I would now like to turn to Mr. Rabakin. Sir, digital is the #2 priority on President von der Leyen's list of political guidelines. What can you tell us about what the European Commission is doing in this field, and to what extent does it cooperate with the Balkans in this area?
Thank you, Corina, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this conference. Well, your question would require several hours to answer. However, because as you said, that digital is one of the priority for this commission, there is an entire financing program dedicated to digital. It's called Digital Europe, that is coming up, which will invest several billions of euros to, let's say, improve the digital infrastructure in the member states, and other several initiatives. But I would like to focus on something that is closer to my daily job, and I think it's very interesting also for the audience that of this conference. So I suppose, you know, you are all aware about the problem of disinformation. It was mentioned before by Paul, and Paul make a great introduction actually. And it's great to hear that also outside the let's say the member states, there is this convergence to the idea that in order to tackle the issue that are related to the digital environment, a co-regulation is needed. And this is the direction where we are exactly going, because in December last year, the Commission has issued a digital service, a legislative proposal, which is called Digital Services Act. And the intention is to, you know, regulate the digital environment more in order, you know, to tackle those issues that are that emerge in the recent years and that are linked to the digital environment. In particular, the Digital Services Act tries, you know, to increase the responsibilities for service providers, for intermediaries, in order, you know, to limit the spread of illegal content and to limit the risk that this type of services can bring to society. And one of these risks is disinformation. We witnessed during the pandemic what kind of, how harmful can be disinformation, because in the past, of course, we had cases of disinformation campaign that affects the democratic process, which was very bad. We have clear cases in the United States in the election, in 2016 election, but we have also witnessed cases of disinformation campaign that try to influence electoral result in the EU, like the famous Macron leaks before the election of the presidents in France, and other several instances that happened in the past years. So, but that was somehow something that we might still perceive as far away from our daily life, or the majority of people might have felt this way. In reality, we saw during the pandemic how dangerous, even for the health of the citizens, can be disinformation. We had cases of disinformation that cause serious consequences for the health of the people, and we are continue to witness how, for instance, the vaccination campaigns is in peril due also to disinformation campaign that are freely becoming viral in the social media. So we really needed to act swiftly to limit this problem, to limit the consequences, the impact of disinformation. And as I mentioned before, we have now a Digital Services Act, but which somehow foresee the creation of co-regulatory regime where, in particular, very large online platforms are requested to assess the risk that their services might pose to society and to implement measures to limit the impact of these risks. And so, of course, the DSA is now a legislative proposal which will take some time to become legislation. But meanwhile, because disinformation is such a relevant problem, we are not staying idle. And actually, we have started like in 2017 to work in particular with the online platform to find ways to limit the impact of disinformation. A centerpiece of this work is the code of practice on disinformation that was signed by the online platform and other stakeholders in 2018. This code of practice is a self-regulatory approach to the problem, because this code has been written by the platforms, and basically the platform committed to take certain measure to limit the risk, the impact of disinformation on society. And for instance, they have committed to limit the monetization of disinformation through online advertisement. They committed to be more transparent with the political advertisement and issue-based advertisement. They committed to be stricter regarding the integrity of their services. So to ensure that the services are not manipulated in order to spread disinformation campaign. They've also committed to empower the user, giving them more information regarding the source of the source of news, giving them more information regarding, let's say, the context in which an information is spread. And also they took commitments to work with fact checker and researchers in order, to increase the capacity of detecting a disinformation campaign online and analyze them in a more in a better way, in order to understand what are all the nuances of this problem. So this was a premiere worldwide, and I'm coming also here to the point how what we are doing can also be beneficial for Balkan countries. And in this respect, this code, as being a worldwide premiere, but of course has spillover effect, because several services that the platform have deployed to fulfill their commitments have been applied worldwide. So on this sense, we can see a spillover effect that is beneficial not only to the member states. And we have seen also that researchers that can have access, for instance, to data, the platform data, can develop, can do studies on disinformation campaign that are also happening in the Balkans. So on this sense, I think that our approach has really an impact worldwide. And we see now that these type of codes have been put in place also elsewhere in the world. We have Australia, which has a similar code of practice, and then discussion are also ongoing in Canada and in other part of the world. So that's certainly beneficial to also probably to the Balkans. Let me continue briefly on this, talking about the code of practice, because the code of practice is now a couple of years old. Last year we have made an assessment of the code, and we will soon issue a guidance in which we will tell platforms or signatory of the code how we would like the code to be improved, because the code has several gaps. I'm not going into the details. I'll be happy to answer questions if there are any, and we can then dig into the details later. But certainly there are issues like not enough coverage in all member states of the commitments taken by the platform. Like I mentioned, the access to data is not sufficient, the access to data that researchers have so far. So we are asking platform since a long time to improve their access to give more access to the researchers. And there are other aspects related to monetization that needs to be improved, and also related to integrity of services. So at the end of May, this guidance will be announced, and after that we count on the willingness of the signatory and also on the willingness of new signatory to come together and improve the code. The code will need to evolve, also taking into consideration the Digital Services Act proposal, which in particular for very large platform foresee that these kind of services can create code of conducts in which basically they address the risk of posed by their services. So the idea is that the code of practice that we have now, which is a self-regulatory instrument, becomes part of the co-regulatory framework which will be created by the DSA, and therefore become a code of conduct under DSA to tackle the risk related to disinformation. I don't want to take too much time. I would just want to mention another important initiative that could have spillover effects also in the Balkans, because we are financing the creation of the European Digital Media Observatory. The European Digital Media Observatory is an observatory which will basically support the work of a multidisciplinary community involving fact checkers, academic researchers, but also other relevant stakeholders in tackling the phenomenon of disinformation. Because while there is a need for an intervention from government, we have to be careful that we don't create a ministry of truth. So we have to actually empower the society to be more resilient against disinformation. That's why we have created this observatory, which is completely independent from the Commission. He has already a functional central platform, which an independent governance board, and soon this observatory will have national hubs that will be connected together through the central platform, and these national hubs will carry out analysis and detection of disinformation campaign on national basis. And I am sure that the work of these hubs will also somehow be beneficial for the Balkan countries, because we all know that disinformation is borderless, and so very often the narratives that are used to spread disinformation are very similar on all around the world. So I think that could also offer a spillover effect in the Balkans. I stop here, and of course I'll be happy to go into more details later if necessary.
Thank you so much. I wonder if I can prompt you a little bit more on this issue of spillover. So it's true that potentially there could be the many and great efforts that the EU is doing in this area could inspire also action in the Balkans and good practices. But in reality, can you be more concrete a little bit about these potential spillovers, and to what extent do you think that we also need to encourage them more effectively, rather than just hope that the Balkan region will benefit as well? I mean, for example, the Balkan countries are part of a process at the end of which they hope to become EU member states, and we know that this process is quite heavily loaded with conditionality. So should the issues linked to digital policy become prominent also in this accession process, or are there other ways in which we can encourage and realize, as you call it, and Paul mentioned it, co-regulation or joint action?
Yeah. Well, listen, we are touching on now here different aspects of which I'm not an expert. But to be concrete, I mentioned this observatory, which is like something that, of course, is financed through Connecting Europe facility programs, which is dedicated to member states and other countries of the European Economic Area. But the observatory, for instance, will be open to cooperation with entities that are outside the EU. And for instance, if there are initiatives in the Balkans, academic initiative or other part of initiatives that tackle the problem of disinformation and involve, civil society, academics, fact checkers, I invite these initiatives to get in touch with the observatory, because I think it will be beneficial. It will be a win-win situation if EDMO, the European Digital Media Observatory, is capable also to bridge two initiatives that are active outside the EU borders, and in particular, if they reach two initiatives that are active in neighboring countries like the Balkans. So I think that would be great, and will be helpful also, because this observatory will put in place a platform for fact checkers and researchers to really do work on the ground. So we could explore the possibility to open these resources also to initiative in the Balkans. So on the fact that on the requirement that for joining the union, I'm not feeling confident in replying, but what I have just told you, I think it's a concrete initiative that could be, I think, quite easily implemented.
Thank you so much for this for highlighting this possibility. I would now like to come to Mr. Popovic. As a member of the European Youth Parliament, how do you see the role of young people in shaping regulation in the digital sphere? And how is the Youth Parliament acting to support the involvement of young people from the EU member states, but also from the Balkan countries in this regard?
Well, wonderful. First of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I think that it's a very important discussion to have, and most notably within both a Western Balkans perspective, but also within the European perspective. So hi, everyone. My name is Nicola, and I'm one of the board members of the European Youth Parliament on the international level. And also I have a background in working within the Western Balkans. So what I would really like to discuss today is most notably the role of these civil society organizations that we have within the Western Balkans. And I think that it's a very specific arena for these organizations to work in, because I don't think that there's an area within Europe where the civil society has such a big impact on how the policies are gathered and how the policies are implemented as well. So I think that in this discussion, most notably in terms of digitalization as well as digital security and access to internet, the fact that it was CEP and the EPC guiding the process within the Western Balkans shows a lot about the whole impact that the civil society can have on this debate. And so in the same regard, I would say that there's a lot of potential to be done with these within these civil society organizations to really educate young people about the concepts and the problems that come with digital media. And for example, if you were to compare the education curriculum within the Western Balkans to, for example, France or Switzerland, you would see that there is one aspect lacking, and most notably, it's the civic education part that's lacking. So I really see that the civil organizations within the Western Balkans could use that gap in young people's education to really inform them about both the dangers of social media, but also all of the concrete steps they can take in order to be better informed and to carry out their information better. And I think this was also something that was pointed out in the document that was published by the EPC yesterday, that it was most notably older people, the participants remarked that it was mostly older people who were prevalent in disinformation. And I think this has to do because young people evolve with this idea of disinformation being present. But I think it's really necessary to continue to educate young people about all of the dangers of social media, but also all of the possible benefits. Because as we see it within young people, we see social media as very much a tool, but it's a two-way tool. So young people need to learn how to use the tool, and also there is possibilities that others are using the same tools on us. So education is really the most crucial aspect when it comes to dealing with digitalization within the Western Balkans. And I really invite the whole concept of NGOs getting behind this idea of educating young people about these topics. And another aspect that I would like to tackle is this concept of, I guess, data protection within the Western Balkans and who can really be in charge of this regard. And I think that the fact that, for example, the GDPR hasn't been applied in the Western Balkans showcases that there is no real push within the countries themselves to implement these policies. I think Turkey was the only one to actually carry out a GDPR plan. But also, if you were to look at the pre-accession criteria for the Western Balkans, yeah, the chapter 10 that covers media doesn't really cover the digital aspects of it. So I think there's a clear lack of both expectations from the European Union when it comes to the Western Balkans joining in this regard, but also this is such a fast evolving environment that I don't think that the European Union is able to implement new measures. And I'm really glad to hear from our past panelists that there's this digital media observatory that's being created. I think that it's going to help a lot with this creation of a safer European social media public sphere. And lastly, to touch upon the concept of, I guess, Balkan people and Western Balkan youth not being involved in the future of Europe, I think that it's a big problem. And that's something that the European Youth Parliament is trying to tackle as well. And most notably, we've extended our poll for the future of Europe to all participants within Europe as a whole, so within Europe as Council of Europe, as opposed to just the European Union. Because we feel that it's very important to take others' opinions concerning Europe, and maybe we're not seeing something that's been happening in our internal border just because we're out of it, but also because I think there's a lot of things that young people from the Western Balkans can offer to the European Union when it comes to this resilience, as we said. I think that the Western Balkans youth is very resilient to all of these changes and, I guess, political changes that have been happening, that I think that there's quite some keynotes to take away from that discussion. And I'm really glad that the EPC and the CEP were organizing these calls with young people all throughout the Western Balkans and not specifying within one country, but really making it accessible to all. So I think it's a discussion that, and maybe it's an example for the European Union to take also into account when discussing these issues with young people. It's that representation is key, and young people really need to have that safe space where they can extend their opinions, their thoughts on these issues for it to be a really fruitful debate. And I think that over the upcoming years, both the European Youth Parliament, but every organization that's working in the Western Balkans will have this role of really needing to reach out to young people in order to get really their opinions and to be able to construct also their ideas. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really open to having this discussion a bit more wider as well, both from Tasneem and her representatives of young people, but also maybe to people who are outside of the Western Balkans who may not perceive the issues that are present in the region.
Thank you so much. This was very interesting. And to be honest, one of the proposals and demands of these young people who participated in the consultations was particularly education. So they've all asked for education, and they emphasized the importance of education at an early age, which we thought was very interesting. Of course, as we know, education remains a national prerogative. It's usually handled at national or regional level. So there are many questions that pend in the air of whether the incorporation of, for instance, courses or classes on digital issues becoming part of the curricula in schools should be done in each country differently, or if a common framework should be found. And of course, we even pondered about the question of whether social media platforms can become more proactive in educating their users about how they should work. I don't know if in the member states we've given some thought to these ideas or anything is being done, and if you are aware of it, but if you do, please share it with us.
Yeah, I think there is a couple of instances. For example, I'm very familiar with the Swiss case, and most notably the Geneva, which is, of course, a capital of human rights. But they make a point within their education system is to, at least for a period of time, focus on the concept of human rights. And where classes are brought all from ages to 4 to 18 to really focus on these simple ideas that are living with each other and human rights, basically, that we're all born. And I think that's something that's very much lacking in the Western Balkans. There is almost zero discussion about the concept of human rights within the education system. And you mentioned something that's very interesting that it hasn't come up to ideas, is this role that media platforms could play in educating young people. And we've seen it with the COVID cases. I think that now when you scroll on Instagram or on Facebook, you automatically get a notification, oh, get more informed about COVID-19. And I think this is a precedence for future engagement with the audience, is that the social media platforms could really use this, I guess, a new skill that they learned, which is how to better inform the audience about both the dangers and the possibilities of using Facebook or Instagram in a day-to-day. So yeah, I think you make a great point in that regard. And I think that just formulating these thoughts or these ideas could lead to something more beneficial from them.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I come now to Ms. Saila, and I come to you last because I know that you are the director of a digital policy observatory that monitors the latest developments in digital policy, keeps a close eye on all the relevant issues, actors, events, and processes, and provides access to the latest research and data on internet policy. As such, it seems to me that you have a full bird's eye view on what is actually going on, both in the EU and I'm hoping also elsewhere, like in the Balkans. So it would be great to hear now from you how you respond to what the other panelists have contributed from their own individual perspectives. Ms. Saila.
Perfect. Thank you for the floor. As you will say, Corina, I'll take a zoomed out approach. So rather than focus just on the Balkans, I'll focus on the EU, but also a little bit beyond. And this is because of how interdependent the world is right now. So how connected we all are. But first, thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here with you all, and congratulations to all the young people involved in this project. So Tasneem and all your colleagues. It is so inspiring to see young people actively involved in digital policy, actively involved in shaping their own digital future, because this will impact not only the way that we use and develop the internet, but also how future generations are able to benefit from all the potential of digital. And I link this also to another, an introductory reflection. It's also a welcoming sign to see a lot of focus on the opportunities. So both Paul and Nicola before me, they focused not so much on the protectionist approach, but more on the opportunities, and that's especially important when it comes to the younger audience. From my experience, a lot of the debate on the use of the internet by young people, especially in the past, has focused a lot on protectionism, to the extent that it has been a little bit misused in some parts of the world. So here, focusing on the possibilities, the opportunities, is a really good sign that we're moving beyond this quite restrictive approach and really seeing what or how the digital technology can be of benefit. Obviously, the risks are there, so it's also good to see that the young people are not naive on these things. So risks are there, but there is a much more balanced view, especially from the young people, on how to look at policy issues. And This also emerged from the report that you published yesterday. Part of the report, I read it very briefly, also says that a lot of the policy debate has been dwelling on the negative or the harmful aspects, but there's also the benefits there. So this puts things into perspective. In the next few minutes, I'll focus on two things. First of all, a substantive view of digital policy, and the second part will be on some important policy processes in addition to the process that you're involved in, which can also emphasize the point on interconnectedness. So I'll highlight some parallel processes that can also augment the work that is being done here. So back on substance, building on what Alberto said, the EU regulatory framework is affecting obviously the countries in the EU, so the EU member states, but beyond. And I'll give two examples, both of which are related to our use of social media platforms, since there has been a lot of emphasis on the use of social media here. And the two examples are the following. The first is the GDPR. So the GDPR is affecting entities handling data based in Europe, but also beyond. So there, the reach of the GDPR goes beyond European shores, which makes it super, super important to really follow what the EU's plans are, and also what the legislative debate is how it is progressing. Especially when it comes to the second example, which is the new AI regulatory framework that the European Commission has just proposed. There is a similarity to the GDPR in that it won't only affect the entities that are based in Europe, but also entities based beyond European shores that will affect European citizens. So these are just two examples of how EU regulatory frameworks, they really need to be followed because of their impact. And for instance, going back to the GDPR, although there some countries frown even upon the let's say how strict the GDPR is, but there are countries who really have followed very closely that and adopted their own version of the GDPR, obviously tailored for their own region. For instance, Brazil is one of those reasons. So again, the golden standard for others to follow, and that is why it is super important to really be involved and keep an eye out on what is happening. I'll reflect also on the process, so highlighting a few existing fora that can be used to collaborate with, also discussing what is happening in the Balkans and in Europe in general. And that's the Southeastern European Dialogue on Internet Governance. I don't know whether you are aware of this dialogue, but every year, large groups of young people gather. Obviously now it is online, but they gather to discuss the policies that are important for the Southeastern European region. There's also the, let's say it's parallel or its sister process, which is the European Dialogue on Internet Governance. It's also a platform where a lot of debates on digital policies take place, and maybe two sources of knowledge would be schools of internet governance. So this is it might be interesting for the young people to learn more about digital policy processes, perhaps from, let's say, comprehensive approach. So not just, for instance, focusing on the privacy issues, but focusing on the issues that affect for instance, how privacy affects the economic models, or how privacy affects encryption, security, etc. So this comprehensive view is, from my experience, quite important for practitioners, even if they work only in one area. So there are quite a few schools on IG in Europe. There's again Southeastern Europe digital IG school, CD it's called. I can provide links as a follow-up. Last but not least, as Corina mentioned, the Digital Watch Observatory, which we really follow what is going on, not just in the EU, but elsewhere, and it helps people keep up to date with what is happening. It's a bit of a different observatory from the digital media one, but the aim is really to keep up to date with all the policy updates around the globe. So Corina, back to you.
Thank you so much. That, very interesting to learn about all these initiatives that are that exist. I just wanted to maybe ask you about one point that you raised, because you mentioned of how different efforts by the EU are having an impact that transcends the EU's borders on entities elsewhere. And so it is important for the outside world to watch and to follow. You use the word follow what the EU is doing. But I was wondering, I mean, the Balkan countries are not just any entities. They are prospective EU members. They are our closest neighbors. To what extent do you think we should and we could move from having them follow what we're doing to getting them involved in what we're doing, especially in a regulatory and legislative way? I mean, of course, this can only be, I mean, can be only your opinion if you so wish. It doesn't have to be based on any evidence.
Sure, and in fact, I'll rely only on my what I think can be done. So one important area where anyone can contribute is in open consultations. Open consultations, they provide the opportunity for the public, whether they are the main stakeholders involved, or well, any of the stakeholder groups, to really reflect on the policy issues and make an impact on shaping the policy processes. So I think that's something that perhaps from what we see related to ongoing consultations, something that needs to be leveraged even more. So there are a lot of opportunities to contribute, but for various reasons, I don't think that all the stakeholder groups are taking advantage of these open channels for sharing their thoughts on what can be done. So if I had to pick one, let's say, channel, that would be it, because in some cases the opportunity is there, and I don't think that anyone should shy away from contributing ideas to these processes.
Great, thank you so much. Definitely using existing formal channels should be done more consistently. But of course, we're also talking about the digital field. And when I think of digital, I think of the latest technology and of ease of action, if I can say so. So I'm also wondering to what extent we can become a little bit more creative, not only because we're talking about an issue that is relevant across borders, but also because we're talking about technology which in principle can enable us to reach further and consult further. Personally, I would hope that we can be more ingenious and maybe also jump on this wave of citizen participation. You know, this is a trend now in Europe, participatory democracy, and maybe combine experiments in citizen participation with different technologies in order to allow for different voices, including those of young people in the member states or elsewhere who are affected by policies, whether we intend them that way or not, to be heard. At least this is my personal wish. I don't know if the panelists feel differently. But before I come back to our speakers, I want to open the floor for questions. So if you would like to ask our panelists something or to comment on what's been said, please do so. I see that we already have 2 questions in the chat box, and both of them are addressed to Mr. Rabakin. The first one comes from an anonymous attendee, and is saying, on European Digital Media Observatory, have you received any feedback from the Western Balkan governments regarding this observatory? If not, how can the regional civil society organizations encourage their governments to actively embrace this initiative? This would be particularly important as the European External Action Service recently published a report in which it warned of rising trend of disinformation in the Balkans. So that's one question addressed to Mr. Rabakin, but maybe the other speakers want to have an opinion as well. And the second one, disinformation is not only an outside issue. We see governments steering disinformation inside the Union. Example, the anti-Soros campaign. This goes hand in hand with a shrinking of civic space and campaigning against civil society. How do we meet this combined challenge? I think this is a question that is pertinent. It comes from Stefan Lütke now and is pertinent, I think, to more than just Mr. Rabakin. Can I come back to Mr. Rabakin and to our panelists now, while I'm hoping that the rest of the participants also join our debate. Mr. Rabakin.
I was muted, sorry. I'll try to be brief also to leave space to the colleagues that are connected here. And certainly regarding the participation of Balkan entities into the observatory, let me specify a few things here. First of all, governments are not involved in the observatory. The funding is provided in this case by the European Union through this Connecting Euro Facility program, but the observatory, the central platform, and the national hubs will be completely independent from any public authority. This is a strong requirement that we have imposed in our call for proposal when we have asked consortia created at the national level to come forward with proposal in order to become a national hub. So the national hubs are projects that are run by universities, fact-checking organization, or other type of organization that created a consortia to put forward a project idea. So what I refer earlier was to the possibility for entities like universities or other civil society organizations to get in touch with EDMO. You can go and look for edmo.eu, and you will find all the contact points, and to see if there is the possibility to participate to some of the activities of EDMO. EDMO will not be able to fund at this point in time any activity. They don't have this task. They receive the funding to run certain actions, but certainly they can. I'm sure they will be open to possibility to cooperate with other entities, even from outside the union. Regarding the second question, which, as you said, Corina, open to everybody. This is exactly why we started with a self-regulatory approach. And this is also why we finance EDMO in order to come up with an independent infrastructure that can tackle the problem of disinformation, because when this information comes from outside the union, can be considered, as a threat imposed by a third country, and therefore there can be let's say, a response from the authorities. But in particular, when the disinformation comes from inside and is of political nature, we have to be careful. And we should avoid a strong intervention from public authorities, because this can, as I mentioned before, create the Ministry of Truth. That's why our initiatives are mainly focused on increasing the resilience of the society. EDMO is one case. We have also media literacy initiatives that are helpful in this sense. So it's really important to increase resilience of society more than having taking the risk of censorship from public authorities.
Thank you, Mr. Ravakin. Anyone else wants to take on this second question, at least? Paul?
Thanks, Corina. Yeah, I think that there's a few things that I could maybe say about disinformation, because I didn't say much in my initial intervention about young people's discussions about this topic, partly because there were so many other topics, and I used to give a very broad overview. But of course, it's something that they discussed at quite some length. And in particular, the subject of freedom of speech and censorship and all of these kind of issues that are connected with the fight against disinformation were very much something that got a bit of attention from the young people in their debate. I suppose in the end, I can't say that there was one clear conclusion, but that reflects the fact that it's a complicated subject, of course. And I recognize this point that one of the participants here mentioned, that within the EU, there are sometimes internal sources of disinformation which are rather harder for us to respond to, partly because of legal reasons, than external campaigns that come from, say, Russia, China, whatever. But in the Balkans, it's absolutely the same. Of course, there are internal sources of disinformation. Sometimes there are also national governments that have a somewhat restrictive approach to media freedoms, media pluralism. So this came up in the discussions with the young people too. They discussed, for example, one idea that was raised was that there could be a central register for media outlets. So you could sort of see which media outlets had registered properly, what their ownership structure was, and so use this to help to understand whether they were reliable media or if they were potentially spreading disinformation. And this was an idea that a few of the participants found quite appealing, but there were always others who came in and said, that's a nice idea, but I would be uncomfortable about putting too much power in the hands of the national government, knowing that the state of media freedom in the region is not always as good as it could be anyway. So there are also particular challenges that the Balkan region are facing, which are not by any means unknown to EU member states, but I think that's important to bear in mind as well. Another thing about disinformation that is maybe specific to the region, there has been a lot of attention or somewhat sensational headlines the last few years about disinformation actors or troll farms in the region that are targeting the EU. And that's often connected with young people, because supposedly there are a lot of young people in the Balkans who are able to make quite a lot of money by creating content that tries to appeal to European or American audiences. And so troll farms in North Macedonia and this sort of thing is a topic that comes up again and again. I think what that debate misses is the fact that youth unemployment in the region is so high, and people are struggling so much to find good ways of making a living, that these slightly, shall we say, questionable or illegitimate ways of making a living through disinformation or other techniques have a quite natural appeal because of the ability to actually support yourself in an economy which is not competitive in many other ways and isn't able to provide young people with very good opportunities.
Very good point, Paul. Anyone else wants to come in? If not, then I will invite, I see that Teodora from Prikezi has raised her hand. So Teodora, if you want to pose your question, please do it now.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you all for your kind interventions. My question is the following, and mostly addressed to Mr. Rabahin. So how can we make sure that EU-driven initiatives, such as the one you mentioned, the Digital Media Observatory, are most efficient in regions like the Western Balkans? So does local civil society play an important role? And if it does, in the delivery of such initiatives, how are they supported?
Right. Thank you, Teodora. I think maybe the issue of spillover effect can also be tackled also by some of the other panelists. But I want to add to Teodora's question another question from the chat box, and it comes from Andrea Mladenovic. May we expect any positive changes in terms of young people's digital rights without a more meaningful dialogue between representatives of social media networks and the EU member states government or /EU institutions? So those are the two other questions that our participants are interested to hear from you about. I wonder if I can ask Nicola maybe to attempt some of these questions, or maybe comment more broadly. This is the final round of question we have at our disposal, so I'm going to use it also for any final remarks.
Yeah, I would comment mostly on the spillover effect, and I would say mostly on the role of civil society. I think that it's very important in the Western Balkans to really utilize the space of civic organizations and organizations working on these issues. And I think that what was mentioned was a regulatory body within the Western Balkans to monitor this. And I really do see the civil society playing a big role in shaping that, both that debate, but also maybe the process in itself. Because I think that there's big mistrust in the government and the usage of government institutions in this regard. So I think that it could be a potential, either a solution or a potential way forward to include more of the civil society organizations and these think tanks when it comes to designing the whole system. And when it comes to e-government within the Western Balkans, I think that it's dragging its feet quite vividly. So I think there's a big space for both the European institutions and the European civil society to support the Western Balkans in this perspective. So yeah, within the European Youth Parliament, for example, we've done a lot of work in terms of the GDPR application within the Western Balkans, just because we are a network of young people that moves around. So there is that need to safeguard the information. And I would say that a lot of other organizations working within the Western Balkans are the same and have the experience within GDPR. So it could be a positive practice to look forward to.
Ms. Seiler, would you like to respond to any of the questions or add your final remarks?
No, I don't think I have anything, just to reiterate what my colleagues have just said.
All right, thank you. Paul, I come to you so that I go last to Mr. Rabakin.
Very good, thanks. I do have a quick comment regarding spillover effect as well. Although to a certain extent, Corina already said it, maybe I'll say it again just to try and reinforce it. I think Corina put it very well when she said that the Balkan countries aren't just any countries for the EU. You know, it's great that the EU has a lot of influence and standard setting for global standards in digital topics, and EU regulation, whether it be GDPR or the approach against disinformation with the Code of Practice and so on, is being emulated in other countries and is serving as an inspiration for other countries' approaches, and that's great. But the countries of the Balkans are special in their relationship with the EU precisely because they are part of this enlargement procedure, and they do hope to one day join. And for that reason, it would be great if there was slightly more coordination between, or not coordination so much as more formal ways of bringing in Balkan states into the policy development process and making sure that they are implementing these things as part of the enlargement process. Now, of course, that's a comment for DG NEAR, not for DG Connect. I don't expect Mr. Rapakin to expand on that. But as far as I'm aware, maybe we might have a participant in the chat who might be able to contradict me. But as far as I'm aware, there is this digital agenda for the Western Balkans, which is part of the EU enlargement process. But I think that it focuses mostly on connectivity and infrastructure, rolling out 5G or even 4G in some areas, and this kind of rather practically minded connectivity questions, rather than the more, shall we say, social aspect and the regulation for data use and social media and this kind of thing. So since digital is one of the biggest priorities for the Commission in general, I think maybe it could take a more prominent role in the enlargement process as well. Enlargement doesn't need to be only about rule of law and democracy and environmental standards, things like that. I would like to see digital take a more prominent role as part of that process as well.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Rabakin, any final remarks?
Yes, first of all, just a personal view to what just Paul said, and I believe, you know, digital became a priority for the Commission during this mandate, we could say, you know, a strong priority. So I think with a certain delay, this will also become, will be reflected also in the relationship with the neighboring countries. Regarding the question on the dialogue between the representative of the social media networks and the governments and the EU institution, what I can say is that since we have started the work with the platform for the development and implementation of the Code of Practice on disinformation, we witness an improved cooperation and of the platform, and an improved dialogue with between us and the platform. For instance, let's take the COVID pandemic again. We were able to monitor, and we receive monthly reports on what the platform do to tackle the phenomenon of disinformation related to the COVID pandemic. So if you search, you will see online, you will see that there are monthly reports on this. And this is very useful because we understand better what they do. And we are also able to go back to them and ask them what we think they should do, because we know better what they do. So we have a clear idea on what to ask to them. And I personally think that also the discussion, the fact that there is a proposal for the Digital Services Act is also imposing, to a certain extent, a much more structured dialogue between the social media net, the online platforms that often are not European organization, but have their main headquarters somewhere else. So the DSA will force an improvement on the relationship between the institution at the EU and national level and this organization. So I think on this we are on the good track. And indeed, overall, whenever we have an initiative like the Digital Services Act, there is always a public consultation, and it's a meaningful power. So it's a it's a powerful mean for citizens as well and for youth organization in your case to get their voice heard by the EU institution. So I kind of invite you to follow up to all the public consultation that the Commission published, because it's very useful even for officers, to read all this material, to read all these contributions. It's not only through the dialogue with the industry that we build our policies, but that there are excellent ideas coming from the civil society and from the citizens. So that's I encourage everybody to participate.
Thank you so much, and we're happy that this can offer some food for thought, and we'll certainly hope that more similar projects will happen in the future, and that this is will mark the beginning of stronger cooperation and consultation of young voices. And speaking of young voices, before we say goodbye, I wanted to first turn to Tasneem. She's listened quietly to all the interventions and this exchange today, and I was just wondering if at the end, how did you find this conversation, Tasneem, especially given the discussions that you had with at home with your fellow young people, and yesterday with the other young people from the other Balkan countries. How does this compare?
Thank you, Corina. I have to say it has been a pleasure to listen to many of the wonderful opportunities that you have brought up. And I have to mention that I'm actually born from the United States, but my parents are originally from Bosnia. So I don't really have the highest knowledge when it comes to the European Union and the relationships between European countries. So that's something that I've been currently trying to research by myself, and just listening to what you have, to the things that you have brought up, especially the observatory that Mr. Alberto has mentioned. I believe that this will encourage not just me, but all of the participants and the youth of the Balkans to take action and be able to use some of these approaches in their communities. And I thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Tasneem, and I certainly hope that this has been a positive enough experience to encourage you to remain active and want to express your voice. Thank you so much. And before I close, Lola, as the coordinator of this very interesting project that has given us a topic of discussion today, any final thoughts?
Thank you, Corina. First of all, it brings me great joy to hear Tasneem that she has had a very positive experience and that she has had a lot of good takeaways that will prompt her into action in the future. I'm also very happy to see that a lot of the participants that were engaged in all the citizens consultations are following us today, which also brings me great joy because I know that they're very interested and they're still wanting to take a part in making the digital space a safer and a better space for everyone. I also want to thank EPC for this opportunity, and I also want to say that I'm very happy that the panelists recognized our project as an example of good practice and for citizens consultation and for everything that we've done. So I want to say thank you, and yeah, that's about it.
Thank you to you, Lola, and well done with this project, and I hope you'll do more of such good work in the future as well. Having said that, we have come to the end of our event today. I want to thank our panelists for their time and contributions, and to thank also our participants for being with us here today. I wish everyone a wonderful afternoon, and we'll continue the conversation on a different occasion. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.